Hello and welcome to Business Africa with me, Ronald Kato. This week, Uganda intensifies search for pipeline financiers as climate concerns keep major lenders away. Plan to shift 230,000 barrels of crude per day for export through Tanzania. The pipeline is a key element in Uganda's ambition to become an oil producer. Plus, how set is Africa for a digital transition? The continent, while urbanizing fast, lacks the requisite digital infrastructure to power growth and jobs. We report from the Paris Infra Week. Also, Kenya goes after surging prices again by tightening access to liquidity. East Africa's largest economy raised its benchmark lending rate by 75 basis points, the highest in over 7 years. Stay with us for the details. Thank you for joining us. A European Parliament resolution 2 weeks ago slammed the East African crude oil pipeline, a planned conduit to move landlocked Uganda's oil to the East African coast for environmental and rights violations. It's the last thing Kampala and oil majors Total and CNOOC needed. Major lenders are already keeping away from the project, and Uganda is growing apprehensive that delays could render its vast oil reserves useless.
Uganda's ambitions of joining the oil producers club are almost entirely dependent on a pipeline being built between the oil fields in the Lake Albert region and the Tanzanian port of Tanga on the East African coast. Officially called the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, EACOP, the facility, the world's longest heated pipeline, will move 230,000 barrels of oil per day. But the project has been the target of climate activists who say it is an environmental disaster waiting to happen. The campaign has seen around a dozen major lenders and insurers pull out or decline to commit funds to the pipeline, estimated to cost around $5 billion. France's Total Energy is the project's biggest shareholder with 62% stake. Uganda and Tanzania both owed 15% each. Chinese oil major CNOOC has an 8% stake. With reserves estimated at 1.4 billion barrels, Kampala, which has bet on oil for future growth, appears to be losing patience with European lenders. It is looking inside Africa and east to China to get its resource out of the ground.
Ali Sekatawa is the Director of Legal Affairs at the Petroleum Authority of Uganda. Thank you so much, sir, for your time. Uganda, as expected, protested the EU Parliament resolution. But as a regulator, does the pipeline pass globally accepted environmental standards and tests?
The EACOP, and by extension, the Ugandan oil project, has undergone a series of environmental and human rights audits by international experts, and it has passed all the minimum required Ugandan and international standards. It has environmental, social, and impact assessment reports that have been done by international experts and monitored by the Petroleum Authority of Uganda and national environment management authorities in both Uganda and Tanzania. And we are very confident that the environmental concerns and human rights concerns raised at any forum can be competently answered, because we have taken enough time, over 10 years, ever since the commercial discoveries were made, to prepare and make sure that the project meets the international standards.
Ali, those concerns have kept some of the major lenders away from committing money to the project. Where are you looking now that some major lenders have pulled out or refused to commit money to the project?
EACOP is both equity and debt. The equity, the shareholders of the project, which is government of Uganda, government of Tanzania, the Chinese, and Total, have fully committed on the part of the debt. I mean, on the equity. On the debt side, we do not have any concerns that any of the banks that are being negotiated with have actually pulled out. We are confident that the financials being discussed with are going to close, as you realized almost a month ago, the Islamic Development Bank confirmed financing for the project. There are many pro-African development banks that will come on board, and also financing is a service.
Uganda is looking at 2025 as the year to start producing its oil. What do you say to concerns that Uganda is rushing into a complex, a very controversial industry without developing the necessary technical and governance capabilities first?
Because we're a new producer, we are a new frontier, but you need to look at it in the context of the fact that commercial discoveries were made in 2006. And since then, actually, the accusation has been that Uganda has delayed. One of the core reasons for delay was the preparation of the institutional and legal and human capacity to manage the resource. We have trained many Ugandans since for the last 10 years in the best universities in the world, exposed them. We have put a state-of-the-art process network. We have put a regulatory and policy infrastructure in place. There are new laws from 2013 and 2016 and new institutions. We fairly feel that we are ready to take on this industry. But as I said, since we are a new frontier, I think some of the other aspects, it is fair to say that we can learn as we are moving forward from people who have been doing this business.
Ali Sekatawa, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for hosting.
Now, despite being a leader in areas such as mobile money, Africa still lacks the digital infrastructure needed to support growth, trade, and jobs. The continent needs to spend at least $7 billion every year to achieve a robust digital transition.
It's estimated that $97 billion are needed for the deployment of fiber optics in Africa to ensure the continent's digital transition. To achieve this, the financing of digital infrastructures has to be the business not only of states, but also of private partners. However, public-private partnerships are still relatively new on the continent. And delegates at the 2022 Paris Infra Week have been discussing how to increase this type of collaboration. Who can finance it is a bit everyone. A telecoms operator will invest. The investment funds we spoke about will put money in addition. The deposit funds, if we manage to mobilize the saving funds of the diaspora, will add to the funds. The idea is to find all the sources of financing and to succeed in making them work together, and this is often the most complicated and longest. Africa could learn from India, which is ready to launch 6G, but it will require specific steps, as the Indian ambassador to France explains.
I think it's a question of, first of all, policy, then also about setting the right institutions, and then making it a climate in which you support the ecosystem for it.
Countries in Africa have traditionally relied on loans from banks for financing, but money from capital markets can play a key role in the development of digital infrastructure. You know, the bond markets have accompanied the development of infrastructure in all regions of the world. In 2021, there were $80 billion of bonds issued for the financing of infrastructure in the world. Unfortunately, it's not used enough in the region and in Africa, which is why we're working to develop the use of these elements for the financing of our infrastructures. Another major problem remains that of risk perception. States should work to mitigate this by better selling a positive image of their country.
Kenya has announced the steepest increase in its benchmark interest rate in over 7 years as inflation piles more pressure on the shilling. The new government in Nairobi has ended a subsidy on petrol and maize flour, sending prices through the roof.
Kenya's central bank has increased the benchmark lending rate by 75 basis points to 8.25%, the biggest margin in more than 7 years. The US Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank and South Africa's Reserve Bank have also raised their key lending rate by the same points last month. The removal of government subsidies on petrol and maize flour has seen prices surge forward. Kenya's new government also plans to end price support measures for diesel by the end of the year. According to Kenya's Statistics Office, inflation hit 8.5% in August from 8.3% in July. East Africa's economy has sought to tighten access to liquidity to shield the already weak shilling from further pressure resulting from imported inflation in the form of rising food prices.
And that wraps up this episode of Business Africa with me, Ronald Kato. The news continues on air and online. Bye for now, and I'll see you on the next episode of Business Africa.